I had watched men die in Spain, in the mud below Badajos, and told myself I was hardened to it. I was not hardened to watch my brother go the same way in his own bed, with the November rain battering Larkmoor's windows like cannon fire. Edric had ridden out at dawn to see the tenant cottages along the river, the ones that flooded every autumn, that no duke before him had troubled to fix. His horse threw him at the ford. By the time the grooms found him, he was half drowned and burning with fever, and the physician who came at midnight would not meet my eyes when he spoke. 3 days, he said. Perhaps 4, if his constitution holds. 3 days. My brother, the Duke of Larkmoor, the man half the county called the Silent Duke, for he had not given a full smile since our mother died, had 3 days. Larkmoor had not always been so cold a house. I remembered it warmer, before our mother's illness. The long table full on Sundays, Edric laughing at something our father said. Grief had narrowed him the way frost narrows a river. What remained ran fast, silent, and very deep. The county took his silence for arrogance and called it faint praise. I had begun these last years to fear it was simply true, and our cousin, Aldous Vance, was already in the breakfast room by morning, asking the housekeeper which rooms might suit him. Once matters were settled, I would have struck him if our aunt had not got there first, not with her hand, but with her voice, which could freeze a man at 20 paces. Matters are not settled, Aldous. Edric has named no will, and he has no wife. Until he does one or the other, you are a guest in this house, and I'd thank you to remember it. Then she turned to me, and I watched an idea arrive in her eyes before she spoke it. There is one person in this house your brother trusts, she said. She has sat with him every night this week. He calls for her when the fever takes him. Have you not heard it? Quill, always Quill. Miss Tamsin Quill had come to Larkmoor 3 years before, hired to read to our mother in her last illness, and had simply stayed, mending linens, tending the still room, reading aloud to whichever servant had taken ill. I do not think I had exchanged 20 words with her in all that time. But Edric had. I remembered now, dimly, a chair drawn nearer the library fire on the days she sat there with her sewing, a particular blend of tea that appeared at 4 o'clock without anyone seeming to order it. You cannot mean. I mean a special license, Rafe, by morning if the bishop can be roused, and a marriage at his bedside if it comes to that. Not for Aldous' sake, for Edric's, so that whatever he wishes for this estate, the cottages, the school, all of it, cannot be undone by a man who has never once asked after his cousin's health. When Aunt Honoria put it to her, in the small parlor off the sick room, I expected refusal or tears or both. I got neither. Tamsin sat very still, hands folded, her eyes drifting once toward the door of the room where Edric lay, as though she could hear him through it. After a long moment, she said only, "Will it ease his mind? At the end? It then yes." They were married before noon, in a room thick with camphor and candle smoke, by a curate who kept glancing at the bed as though Edric might expire mid-sentence. My brother could not sit up. He spoke his vows in a whisper, his eyes finding Tamsin's face and staying there with an intensity I had never once seen him give to anything. Not his horses, not his ledgers, not even, I am ashamed to say, our mother in her own last days. Tamsin slid our mother's ring, fetched by Aunt Honoria without anyone asking, onto his finger because his hands shook too badly to manage it himself. "Thank you," he said, not to the room, to her. It was, I realized, the first time in years I had heard him offer the word to anyone without it, sounding like a dismissal. That night the fever turned worse than the physician had dared predict. By midnight, Edric was barely conscious, his breath shallow and dragging, and old Ferris, steward at Larkmoor for 40 years, who had buried our father and grandfather both, came to find me with a face I recognized. "His Grace is asking for paper, my lord. He says it cannot wait." We propped him against his pillows. His voice, when it came, was barely more than breath, and Ferris had to lean close with his pen to catch every word. "To the household," Edric began. "All of you. Whatever I have failed to say while I lived, let it be said now, while I still can." He spoke of the cottages by the ford, and the school he had meant to build in the village, and asked that both be finished, regardless of who held the title after him. He thanked Ferris, and the cook, and the grooms by name, every one of them, which surprised me, for I had not thought he knew half their names. To the gamekeeper's boy, Sam, who could not have been more than 12, he left the precise sum needed for an apprenticeship in Bristol, a boy I had never once heard him mention, and yet he gave the figure to the shilling, as though he had carried it in his head for years. Then his hand found mine and gripped it harder than I believed he had strength left for. And Tamsin Quill, he said. Write this exactly. Do not soften it. Ferris's pen did not move. Edric's eyes were on the ceiling, but I think he was seeing her face. Tell her, I knew her step on the stair before I knew my own name these last years. Tell her that on the nights I could not sleep for the weight of this house. It was her voice reading in the next room that let me rest, not the physician's drafts. Her voice. Tell her I married her today, not to spite Aldous, though God knows that was a pleasure, but because I could not bear to die a stranger to her, when I have loved her, quietly and uselessly, for longer than I have admitted even to myself. Tell her I am sorry it took dying to say it. Tell her. He stopped. His breath had gone very shallow, and for one terrible moment I believed we had lost him mid-sentence. Tell her I wish I had said it standing up, he finished. And then he said nothing more at all. He did not die that night, but for 3 hours, watching his chest barely rise and fall, I believed he had. So I think did Ferris, who did at Larkmoor what was customary when a duke lay dying. He carried the sealed letter down to the great hall, so it might be read to the assembled household at first light, as our fathers had been, and our grandfathers before that. I did not stop him. I was not thinking of letters. I was holding my brother's hand and praying, for the first time since Spain, to a God I was not certain was listening. Near dawn, his breathing changed. I did not understand it at first. I thought it was the end, the last gathering before stillness. But the physician, when he came running at my shout, pressed his ear to Edric's chest and sat back on his heels with an expression I will remember the rest of my life. The fever has broken, he said. He may live. I should have run downstairs that instant. I did not, because in that moment I heard, drifting up the great staircase, the unmistakable sound of Ferris's voice and the unmistakable sound of women weeping. By the time I reached the hall, Ferris had nearly finished. The household stood in a loose half-circle, candles still burning low from the night's vigil, though gray morning light was creeping through the tall windows, maids with their aprons pressed to their faces, the cook openly sobbing, 2 footmen staring at the floor, as though they might disgrace themselves if they looked up. Aldous Vance stood near the fire with the stunned look of a man who had come for an inheritance, and found himself ambushed instead by a grief that was not his to feel. And in the center of it all stood Tamsin, in her plain gray dress, exactly as she had been at the bedside an hour before, one hand pressed flat against her mouth, listening to a dead man's voice say her name. Ferris read the last lines. Tell her I wish I had said it standing up. And the hall went so silent I could hear the fire settling in the grate. Tamsin did not move. I do not think she could have. It was Aldous, of all people, who broke the silence, not from malice, but because he had clearly understood, at last, exactly what he had lost and exactly why. He never said a word of this to anyone, he said, to no one in particular. 3 years under this roof and he never. He stopped, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked ashamed. I could not let it stand a moment longer. He's alive, I said, and my voice cracked on the word, and the whole hall turned to me as one. The fever broke at dawn. He's alive, and he is asking for his wife. I have never, before or since, seen a room change so quickly. The weeping did not stop. If anything, it grew, but it turned, all at once, into something else entirely. Tamsin was already moving before I finished speaking, gathering her skirts, taking the stairs 2 at a time with no thought at all for what was proper, and I let her go. For some things a brother has no business witnessing. I followed at a slower pace, and so I was there in the doorway when she reached him. Edric was propped against his pillows, white as the linen, but his eyes were open, and they found her the instant she crossed the threshold. The same look he had given her at the wedding, only now there was nothing of the deathbed in it at all. They read it, she said. It was not quite a question. Downstairs, they read all of it. I know, he said. Ferris told me, looking rather alarmed to find me alive to hear it repeated to my face. Every word, Tamsin said. Was it true? All of it? He held out his hand to her, the same hand that had gripped mine through the worst of the night, and this time it did not shake at all. Every word, he said. I meant to die with it unsaid, and instead I lived to say it badly, in front of the entire household, with Ferris's spectacles fogging halfway through. I am told there was not a dry eye in the hall. There wasn't, I said from the doorway, and he looked past her, saw me, and very nearly smiled. Then I shall have to say the rest of it properly, Edric said, now that I am not obliged to whisper, and Ferris is not obliged to write it down for the whole county to hear. The whole county did not hear it, Tamsin said, and there was, for the first time, the smallest curve at the corner of her mouth. Only the household. Larkmoor's household has never once kept a secret in its history, Edric said. By Sunday it will be the whole county. I find, to my very great surprise, that I do not mind. He drew her down beside the bed, and though I could not hear what he said next, and would not repeat it now if I could, for it was no longer any business of mine, I saw her hand close around his, and I saw her smile for the first time in 3 years. Not the careful smile she gave the household, but something wide and unguarded and entirely her own. I closed the door softly and left them to it. They were married again that spring, properly, this time with Edric standing on his own 2 feet in the chapel at Larkmoor, the cottages by the ford newly thatched, and the foundations of the village school already dug in the churchyard meadow. The whole household came, in their good clothes, and stood at the back as though they had earned the right to be there, which, I suppose, they had. Aldous Vance did not attend, though Edric, true to the man that letter had revealed him to be, settled a modest annuity on him regardless, so that no one in this family, he said, need wonder again what they are owed, and what they are not. But it is the letter I remember best, the words read to a weeping household by a man who believed his brother already gone, and the look on my brother's face, years afterward, whenever he caught Tamsin's eye across a crowded room, as if he were still saying every word of it to her, all over again every single day, standing up.